because we know that when you disrupt the integrity of the gut wall, then all sorts of organisms and toxins from different bacteria can leak across into your bloodstream and then travel to sites distant in the body and wreak havoc. So lead to autoimmune type disorders or even mental health disorders potentially in terms of brain inflammation.
I just had so much fun. I talked to Dr. Rachel Brown for this episode, and I did not anticipate having so much in common with Dr. Brown. I guess that shouldn't be that surprising because we have done a lot of similar training. She's a psychiatrist, so not that similar. She went to medical school, but very interested in functional medicine, did a certification in functional medicine. And then we both trained with Dr. Georgia Ede, who is a nutritional psychiatrist. But Rachel Brown wrote the book Metabolic Madness. It is a fantastic book and very user friendly. But I asked her about what compelled her to write the book, so she talks a little bit about that and made it specifically so that clients, her patients, but so that regular people could benefit from understanding metabolic health and mental health. But she goes into gut health. She talks a lot about therapeutic diets for mental health, paleo, whole foods, ketogenic diets, low carb, high fat, and carnivore. So she also talks about medication and some of the issues that come about, particularly metabolic issues that come about with psychiatric medications. We don't talk a ton about that in this episode, but it's in the book. But we just had a delightful conversation. We have some similar experiences experimenting with our own health and eating carnivore and the benefits of that. So it was really fascinating and fun to talk to her. So I hope that you check out the book, check out her website, and certainly leave us comments for this episode. Hope you enjoy it. Happy healing. Dr. Brown, so excited to have you on the show. Thank you so much for taking time to talk to me today.
Oh, no, thank you. It's lovely to meet you. And yeah, just looking
Yeah.
forward to this conversation. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I want to talk about the book for sure, Metabolic Madness. But how did you sort of get into the work that you do? I know you're a psychiatrist, and then at some point you must have figured out functional medicine was important, and so you
Yeah.
just continued to figure these things out. So tell me a little bit about how you got into the work you're doing now.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I mean, I'm a kind of mainstream conventional psychiatrist working in the NHS in the UK, and I've been working in psychiatry since 2004. So went through a
Mhm.
period of training and eventually became a consultant. And I've worked within quite a few different subspecialties within psychiatry and training. And I currently work in a crisis service in Edinburgh. Um, and it was 2020 when I decided to study functional medicine. So, in the midst of all the lockdowns and everything that went on back then,
Mhm.
we found ourselves fairly quiet at times in terms of NHS work and people not necessarily coming to the hospital to be seen. So I basically decided to use my time usefully, and I studied functional medicine with an online qualification.
Mhm.
Um, and it was early 2021 when I trained with Dr. Georgia Ede.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, a few people have asked me recently, when did I realize that there could be such a link between
Mhm.
metabolic health and what we eat and our lifestyles and mental health? And I don't know that I can really pinpoint an exact time,
Yeah.
but nutrition and holistic medicine has just always been a fascination of mine and an ongoing personal interest. So
Mhm.
I tend to personally always opt for more natural treatments and lifestyle measures as opposed to pharmaceuticals. And so I think I just came to this point where I'm at now from a number of different paths, really, and interests.
Right. Yeah, and I trained with Dr. Georgia Ede too, so that's how I
Mhm.
knew
Yeah.
about you, which is great. And I just think, you know, I feel like the same. Like, I feel like I don't know when I can pinpoint a few important times in my life, but I've always
Mhm.
been health and wellness oriented and a little um disappointed, I think, in the mental health field, particularly with the way
Okay.
that we approach things sometimes that
Yeah.
it just, you know, especially with the pushing of the medical model, it just never really felt right to me with clients and patients. Um,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, and, I don't necessarily disagree with you at all. So I think
Yeah.
there's a lot that we don't get right. I think we can help people, but I
Yes.
think things could be done a lot better and very differently. And I think actually now that I'm thinking about it, part of my path into more functional medicine actually came because of I have dogs, and I had a dog who's had major kind of physical health issues throughout her whole life, kind of autoimmune issues particularly.
Mhm.
And a number of years ago, we had to go through conventional but very specialist neurological vets to get her treated for a rare autoimmune disorder where it meant she'd been paralyzed. And just over time, I ended up investigating more holistic veterinary care. And it's been fascinating because the way that holistic and it's a herbal vet that I take her to, but holistic vet's practice is very much in keeping with functional medicine practice as well. So
Yep.
yeah, so that's where part of the interest has come from too.
Right. Yeah, there's always that personal
Hmm.
push, that's something in our life that says we need to look deeper. And yeah,
Yeah.
I completely agree with you. Where did you grow up? Because I'm listening to your accent and I'm like,
Oh,
that's
yeah. So I used to live in America when I was very young, but only until the age of 6. And then we came to Scotland. So it was the West Coast, in a
uh,
small town there, where I grew up. And then I subsequently went to university in Edinburgh, and I've been here since.
I got it.
Um,
Okay. That's yeah.
but there's a bit of Northern Irish in my family as well. So there might be odd words that I say that are a bit mixed.
I love it. I absolutely love it. It's fun for me to listen to you. So yeah, so let's talk a little bit about I mean, I'd like to talk about the food mood connection, but
Mhm.
it helps to talk about gut health. You start your book with gut health, and I think that's a good place to start, the gut brain axis. More people are realizing that the gut has a lot to do with our mental health, but I don't think people really understand, or maybe they don't want to understand how much their food affects their mood. So
Mhm.
maybe we can talk a bit about the food piece too.
Yeah, absolutely happy to.
Yeah,
Yeah, so having a background in functional medicine, I just always come back to the gut for just about everything
right.
because
Yep.
all the bodily systems are connected. And I went through my entire career in psychiatry not really fully appreciating the importance of the gut, even in relation to neurotransmitters in the body. And there's been a huge emphasis in psychiatry to focus on neurotransmitters, partic- because of the medications that have been on offer for quite a number of years now, and their focus tends to be on
Mhm.
manipulating neurotransmitters. And I don't think I'd really fully appreciated that the vast majority of neurotransmitters are manufactured in the gut and reside in the gut, and
Mhm.
just about how important the microbiome, so the gut bacterial population and whatever other pathogens, organisms might be in there,
Mhm.
so they play an absolutely crucial role, looking at the research, with a clear, you know, like hardwired connection between the gut and the brain, and
Mhm.
in the form of the vagus nerve.
Yep.
But we know that there's also bidirectional communication that happens between the gut and the brain. So the brain influences the gut, and the gut influences the brain, and vice versa,
Mhm.
along a line of different mechanisms, so hormonal and different kind of chemical messenger signaling.
Mhm.
So it's fascinating, and I always say to people, I think there's so much that we don't yet know about the gut. So there are studies out there looking at different bacterial populations, and
Mhm.
some studies looking at probiotics, and with mixed results, but sometimes beneficial results in terms of mood. But But
Mhm.
I don't think we're going to know for quite a long time just the full extent of the importance of the gut microbiome and what external factors fully influence it, because I think there's misinformation out there.
For sure. Yeah,
Mm.
because I think that was when I first, I mean, I love mental health. The way that we were trained, I was perfectly happy with that. I was a professor teaching and counselor education. And I
Yeah.
think when I first learned that, like, the majority of serotonin in particular is made in the gut, I was like, wait, what? Because that was never mentioned in any of my training. And so I thought, we need
Yeah.
to be teaching this. It's
Hmm.
just as an option for people to understand. For me, it felt like when we all first started learning trauma and about trauma training. And so you needed to at least be trauma informed if you were going to be a good therapist or work in mental health. And then it feels the same way to me now, metabolic health and gut health. You need to at least be informed about these things in our field. So they may not become, people might not become experts in, how to work with diet in particular or nutrition, but understanding just a basic understanding of the microbiome and
Hmm.
how that influences and this bidirectional through the vagus nerve.
Hmm.
Just to understand that a little bit, I think would be helpful for our field.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And there is really no emphasis on that whatsoever within the field of psychiatry, that as far as I'm aware.
Mhm.
Um,
And I wonder if that's changed. I mean, I think it's emerging, and you're right. It's a baby science.
mhm,
So in infancy, I mean. And
mhm,
so, probably 20 years or so from now, will be integrated more and we'll know a lot more about the gut. And I think when I first started teaching and researching and understanding gut, I was very much into plants. And like plants were important for the microbiome because
mhm.
that's what we read. That's what
Yeah.
a lot of the literature, and it took my own health journey and realizing how important. I've always been a meat eater, so that wasn't a problem for me. But then switching to a carnivore diet for my own health and then realizing how helpful it was for mental health
Yeah.
and the brain fog and clearing. And I thought, oh my gosh, I need to understand this.
Okay.
So, I mean, I think, can we just talk a little bit about,
Mm.
food choices and what that does for mental
Yeah.
health?
Yeah, sure. I didn't actually know that you were carnivore yourself, so that's really nice to hear.
Yeah.
I don't have to tread too carefully in terms
Nope.
of offending you.
I know that feeling. And nope, you're not going to offend me. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean the first thing I often think about in terms of gut health and food choices are
Mhm.
just the obvious, very detrimental choices that people can make. So gluten
Right.
is something that immediately comes to mind in
Right.
terms of causing increased intestinal permeability or leaky gut that people may have heard of.
Mhm.
And yeah, I just still to this day do not understand why so much of the population's diet is based on gluten and processed gluten products. Because we know that when you disrupt the integrity of the gut wall, then all sorts of organisms and toxins from different bacteria can leak across into your bloodstream and then
Mhm.
travel to sites distant in the body and wreak havoc. So lead to autoimmune type disorders or even mental health disorders potentially in terms of brain inflammation.
Yep.
Um, and
Mhm.
it's really interesting. There's something I was reading recently about zonulin and how there are zonulin receptors in the blood-brain barrier.
Mhm.
So the same substance that interacts with the gliadin component in gluten to open up your gut cell wall may also do the same thing in terms of making the blood-brain barrier leaky.
Oh,
Yeah, so there's
right.
so there's some interesting research out there on that. Some of it, some of it theory, and then looking at animal models, but
Mhm.
very interesting nonetheless. And yeah, I've mentioned on another podcast recently there was a case study that I came across of a gluten-induced psychosis in a young person.
Yes.
And it was a really nice case report where they double blinded the researchers and then did a challenge with a gluten tablet, and then a starch tablet, I think, was the placebo, and it was only the gluten that precipitated a recurrence of the psychotic symptoms in this young person, and the symptoms all resolved when they went on a gluten-free diet. So I always it's
Fascinating.
fascinating.
Right?
Yes.
It's so exciting. Like you and I, that is so exciting
Mhm.
because
Yeah,
I mean, we're talking about changing people's lives just with a
absolutely.
little tweak of food. Like just
Yeah,
to, being gluten free is really okay.
yeah.
It's not too hard these days. So,
No.
right?
So yeah, so that's the first thing I always think of. But
Yeah.
then,
Yeah.
you know, I think coming more to the positive, it should be about people trying to make nutrient dense food choices.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, I've had such a health transformation myself in terms of carnivore. And I
Mhm.
always view the carnivore diet as the ultimate elimination diet,
Mhm.
but also as being a subset of the ketogenic diet. So
Right.
I would,
Exactly.
yeah, I would class it as keto itself. Just I think can be incredibly useful for people to pinpoint any food intolerances or difficulties that they may well have. So I've had that in my own personal experience, but I hear from many others in the community about similar experiences. And I'm
Mm.
always amazed by how long you can go through life and just tolerate different symptoms that you just class as normal,
Yep.
that you don't think is particularly major, and then you don't really realize until you've done a proper elimination diet that just the potential for true health. Um,
Yes. Isn't that amazing?
yeah,
Like, and
absolutely.
I thought I was a non-drinker, non-smoker, no drugs,
Hmm.
healthy, ate clean, real food,
Yeah,
which I think is a great place to start, right? Eating
yeah,
whole
yeah.
real food, right?
Yes,
Get the processed junk out and the seed
yeah,
oils. You're
yes,
gonna feel a lot
definitely.
better
Hmm.
regardless, right?
Yeah,
I just had no idea that you could feel this good. I
yes.
did not know that this was possible. So once you feel this good, you're like, you want to tell everyone
Hmm.
um, that you can feel. And I think food is foundational to mental health, and we just
Hmm.
aren't really not everybody understands that yet. And I do think that there are other things like circadian rhythm,
Hmm.
obviously, and sunlight, and those things are
Yeah.
crucial for mental health. But if we could just get people to understand their food, their relationship with the food,
Hmm.
and maybe have better, more accurate information about nutrient dense foods. And that,
Yes.
yeah. Do you want to speak to that?
So I think there's a really nice table in one of Maria Emmerich's books. It
Mhm.
might be the carnivore book that they
Mhm.
wrote, where they compare the nutrient density of various foods. So a list of animal-based foods, and then a list of foods that people would traditionally view as superfoods, so like blueberries and spinach and those kind of foods. And when you
Mhm.
actually look at the nutrient profiles, um, everything else really pales in comparison when you compare the animal foods to other foods that may widely be accepted to be superfoods, but I'm not entirely sure on what basis.
Right, exactly. Well, those nutrients might be there even because we can argue, people could argue, well, there's nutrients and but it's about bioavailability. So being able
Yes.
to absorb it. And I don't know about your practice, but I've found that a lot of people that I work with have absorption issues. So they've
Mhm.
already got digestive issues. Where there are mental health concerns, there are almost always digestive issues. And
Mhm.
so often people are trying to fix the digestive issues and then realize they can fix the mental health issues all together because of the gut health and the metabolic health, but also addressing these nutrient
Yes.
deficiencies by
Yeah, and I
getting,
think
yeah, go ahead.
sorry, and I think that I was just going to say, I think that's where the anti-nutrient argument comes in,
Yeah.
and particularly thinking about anti-nutrients and grains and pulses and beans and other foods that people may traditionally view as healthy. So whole grains, but there's some really nice charts out there. I'm sure you've seen them, graphs
Mhm.
that comparing the bioavailability of zinc, for example.
Right.
I think there was one with oysters, but there may have been various other charts out
Mhm.
there. But once you add in even just black beans or
Mhm.
some other legume like that, then the absorption of zinc just rapidly plummets. And so
Right.
you do have to wonder when people are eating a very mixed diet, including a lot in the way of whole grains and legumes in their diet, just what proportion of their nutrition are they actually absorbing?
Right.
And what we eat is just the foundational building blocks for our brain and
Yes.
all of our body chemistry, essentially all of our bodily systems and tissues. And I always like to come back to the data, or the, I don't know if data is the right word, but the roles that different macronutrients play in the body, and the
Yes.
fact that carbohydrate really just provides energy but doesn't really fulfill any other essential function within the body. But proteins and fats have a long list each of different roles that they fulfill, such as creation of hormones and regulation of
Mhm.
blood vessels and your muscles and your bone, and homeostasis within the body. So just having the balance correct
Mhm.
in everything. And there's a whole long list for both of those macronutrients, but the only thing on the carbohydrate list is provides energy.
Mhm. And
So
really short-lived
yes.
energy
Well,
at
yeah,
that.
that's true.
So, it's, quick energy. But yeah, and I'm not an anti-plant person by any means. I was just as shocked as the next
Mhm.
person to
Yeah.
learn all of these things. So I understand when people are like, "Wait, what?" Um, it takes a minute, and you really have to dig and do your own experimenting. I
Oh
found
yeah.
that I'm not waiting on science to figure these things out, even though we have some emerging beautiful research that's really well
Mhm.
done. I think on particularly on ketogenic diets and mental
Mhm.
health, right?
Yes.
We can talk about that. But I like to experiment with my own food and see what it feels like in my body, and paying attention to those things. I think sometimes people are so sick without knowing. I mean, they're functioning that
Yeah.
they don't realize, and so that can be tricky. But I'm not gonna wait on science to figure
Sure.
these things out for me to try, because I know it's gonna take years and years for us to get there.
Well, absolutely. And I don't know that I particularly would place a lot of emphasis on the nutritional science that's out there in
Right,
terms of the epidemiology
right.
and
Mhm,
poorly formed studies that don't really prove anything in terms of causation. It's just all association. And
mhm. With
yeah,
all the
I would agree.
confounding
Yes.
variables that you're like, was that not the bun that was problem? We've been
Yes.
targeting the meat, but you're talking, yeah, and all these other things that, yeah, nutritional science has
Mhm.
problems for a long
Absolutely. And yet the authorities and
Mhm.
the the
Guidelines.
foundations and so on that publish all the guidelines, they just they take the associational data and state it as though it's fact and that they've established causation. And really when you start to look into the research yourself, there haven't been any studies that show what they try to tell us they show.
Right, they were all gonna die from eating meat and fat.
Well, yeah.
Or that, yeah, and I think fat people really I grew up in the '80s here in the United States, which is
Mhm.
all low fat, low fat, low fat,
Oh, me too.
right?
Yeah.
And, we diet
Fat-free
everything.
90s. And
And I mean, can we just say as mental health professionals too that the artificial anything, but artificial sweeteners are neurotoxins.
yeah.
So if you
Mhm.
want to keep doing that, that's okay, but just know that that's contributing, that your
Yeah.
liver can't process that. And so it's not all getting eliminated. It's got to go hang out. And there was a
Mhm.
study done, actually, I think in the UK. They were looking at causes of death. They were all non accidents. So they were all from, heart disease, diabetes, heart disease, those kinds of diseases. And they looked at um, the the brain tissue had these molecules in it that ended up being artificial sweeteners, the
Oh
chemicals that make
gosh.
art. So it's just hanging out in the brain. So who
Oh
knows what
wow.
these people had going on? They all
Yeah.
died from different things, cancer and all of these things, but
Mhm.
they all had in common these, the chemical compounds of artificial sweeteners and artificial
Right.
substances.
Wow. Yeah, I haven't seen that study, but that's one I'd like to read. Oh, that's horrific, isn't it? When you think
Yeah,
about it. Yeah.
yeah.
And a lot of these sweeteners, particularly the ones that are in just cans of Coke and other sodas, there's lots of research out there to show how detrimental they are, and I always wonder to myself, why don't these companies change to using slightly less damaging sweeteners? Because there are options out there that are definitely not as bad as the aspartame and the acesulfame K and those kind of sweeteners.
Right.
But I think we know why they don't change, probably because it's all
Right.
about profit at the end of the day.
At the end of the
Yeah.
day, it's about
Yeah.
addicting people and having
Yes.
that bliss point, and it
Hmm.
has to be a certain taste for people. But I think the
Yeah.
more people kind of wake up and realize that they're being poisoned by things that they think are potentially healthy for them, then maybe we'll see some change. I don't know. When it
Yeah.
starts affecting people's wallets, maybe we'll see some. I don't get too far into the weeds in that, because I think there's so much to talk about. That we've got exciting research. Ireland is one of the best places to get information about gut health, because so many people in Ireland are diagnosed with celiac, I guess. This makes
Okay.
sense to me, that there's a push to study gut health, and
Hmm.
particularly gluten and what that's doing to the body and all the processed stuff. So there's some really good research. That's where I think we're seeing more research too, on the microbiome and the particular bacteria, and which probiotics might have, and what diets are going to help. I just don't think we're anywhere close to understanding that yet.
No, I agree. And I sometimes I just stop and think about, even when you do the microbiome testing, that
Yeah,
it's a bit like other blood tests you do. It's just a moment in time, and
snapshot.
absolutely, and the bacterial populations will be changing over the course of a day, and along with circadian rhythms, presumably, and
Mhm.
the same as with cholesterol, really, but that's a whole other rabbit hole. But
Yeah,
we think I think we think we know more than we actually do, and there's a lot still yet to be determined.
yeah. And I think those of us who study it all the time and read everything and are super interested in it, we still are learning
Yeah.
every day, and to remember that we're also learning. And I just love, I was a qualitative researcher, so I
Hmm.
love story. So I
Yeah.
like to interview people, and I started interviewing people about 2019, that had specifically changed their diet and had mental health benefits. Whether they were
Okay.
trying to, a lot of them were actually trying to lose weight. They weren't trying to
Hmm.
help their mental health. They were
Yeah.
they were just, and so a lot of them, it's keto, ketovore, carnivore, those
Hmm.
type of
Yeah.
people, or people that had been vegetarians for a very long time, or vegan, and had started incorporating animal foods, and had this big improvement in their brain health,
Hmm.
or in their mental health. So I love these stories, and I think those are more compelling personally, these case studies and these
Yes.
qualitative information. I know we have a big study now, I think it's 2,000 carnivores, and they're just
Hmm.
reporting healthier, more satisfaction too,
Yeah.
because I think a lot of people go on a whole foods ketogenic diet and maybe have results, but they don't necessarily like it as much. Whereas you find in
Okay.
the carnivore community, people start feeling so much better. There's a lot of passion about,
Yes.
because
Right.
it helps people so much. But there's a lot,
Yeah.
I think, because you can eat as much as you want.
Hmm.
So I think that's really relieving to a lot of people who
Hmm.
struggle
Yeah.
maybe with food addiction.
Hmm.
Um, because that's the other piece of carnivore that I think is so helpful, is because you can have improvement on a whole foods diet like paleo or something like
Hmm.
that, and then maybe even try, being in nutritional ketosis, so utilizing a ketogenic diet or fasting or both, so that
Hmm.
you're in nutritional ketosis, and people have a lot of benefits from that, and then find their way, like things are improving, but they're not finding that it's reversing whatever their
Yeah.
issues are, and then so people keep moving and end up in carnivore world. And that's,
Yes, yeah. And yes, I know what you mean about the enthusiasm that exists within that within that community, because it certainly does. I see it and hear it most days. It's such a good thing to have that sort of community online now as well, and to be able to speak to people from all different countries and hear their experiences and hear their success stories, and Yeah, just to touch on what you've said there, that's been one of the biggest benefits for me in terms of carnivore is just addressing food addiction issues. So it was a sugar
Mm.
addiction that
Yep.
I kind of lived with unknowingly for many years. I always thought that I was an emotional eater, and I'd read almost every single book out there about emotional eating and experimented with intuitive eating and all sorts of things over the years, and keto definitely helped a lot.
Right.
But carnivore just took it to a completely new level and just
Mhm.
made it so clear to me that it had actually been a sugar addiction all these years that I'd struggled with.
Mhm.
So on keto, I still had a couple of foods that were still slightly compulsive or I wanted
Mhm.
to snack on, and the satiety wasn't there like it has been on carnivore for me. So that's been really eye-opening.
Yeah, isn't it? That's
And I
same.
think you hear, yeah, okay. I think I was about to say, I think you hear that story a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, because there's improvement, so people just kinda keep going and
Mm.
thinking I remember even saying to my doctor, my functional medicine practitioner at the time, "Maybe this is as good as I can feel." And she was like, I don't know." But she had no idea how to help me beyond,
Yeah.
yes, she was wonderful, I loved her, but she was very root cause, and we were
Mhm.
trying, but she
Yeah.
no idea
Well, they
to
still teach eat the rainbow within functional medicine
oh,
as
yeah.
far as,
Eat the
yeah, so
rainbow. In
yeah,
nutritional therapy, that's what we learned too.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and, I think from a mitochondrial perspective,
Mhm,
you know, that in some ways makes sense that we're eating seasonally, but
mhm.
not a rainbow in winter where there isn't a lot of produce growing. That doesn't make sense
Yeah.
to me.
No, that doesn't.
So really getting more in touch with I've lately I mean, I love the quantum health kind of stuff, whereas, like, it's really more about being connected to your food and it's in season and local is the best because that's giving your
Okay.
body information,
Yeah.
as
That
opposed to
that's something that I need to explore more because I think that's absolutely fascinating, but I've not yet had the time to go down that whole
well,
rabbit
yeah, you've
hole.
been writing a book and getting on it. You've got things to do, and it's a rabbit hole, you
Oh,
know.
yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
You're headed there, I'm sure of it because,
Yeah, yeah. So,
you know
like, I'm aware of grounding and then
Mhm.
structured water and so on. And there's many things that I've been meaning to look into more. So,
You'll love it because it
yeah.
fits perfectly with
Hmm.
what we are doing.
Yeah.
Trying to help people with their lifestyle and their food so that they can stay off of medicine or they can reduce their medication. I
Yeah.
have no problem with medicine. I don't prescribe, you do. So,
Yes.
but I don't have a problem utilizing it the same way I would utilize targeted supplementation.
Hmm.
Using supplements, same. Like if
Yeah.
you and especially when people are learning to make some changes and it's difficult for them, I think supporting them that way is great. But
Yeah.
we're rewilding ourselves essentially with
Yes.
earthing and all of the things that we're like, oh, I didn't realize how important that was. Okay.
Yeah. And I think the stuff that I often feel
Mhm.
regretful about or just concerned about really in terms of the patient population that I see
Mhm.
within my conventional work is just about the longer term metabolic side effects that some of the medications, many of the medications that we prescribe can have. And
Mhm.
again, that brings me back to a ketogenic diet, a very low carbohydrate diet as being just a powerful intervention to even reverse and eliminate potentially some of those metabolic side effects that might well come with medication,
Mhm.
such as weight gain and altering people's blood lipids in a negative sort of way.
Mhm.
So yeah, so I'm really excited about the future in terms of research that's ongoing, particularly into the ketogenic diet. But what I would really love to see is actually some more targeted research in terms of the carnivore diet as
Mhm.
well,
I know.
if I'm being honest.
Right, me too.
Yeah.
But I'm happy with the research that we're starting to see with whole foods ketogenic diets or even just low carb. So if
Yeah.
people are even getting down to or more particular about what carbs they're eating and figuring out which carbs seem to work in their body,
Yes.
especially if they're seasonal, and then,
Mhm.
somewhere around 100 grams. 80, 100 grams as opposed to 300
Yeah.
grams or something. That
Yeah.
even makes a difference. So may not be putting them, I don't know about your population, but my folks sometimes they're not interested in measuring ketones, and
No.
ketosis is too, they don't want to do, and that's completely fine. They can have a lot of improvement without
Mhm.
worrying about whether they're in ketosis or not.
Yeah, I think it's very bio-individual, so I always come back to bio-individuality and, like, one person's experience is not necessarily going to dictate what the next person's experience will be, and I know of people whose mental health has improved by making, um, fairly subtle changes to their diet in terms of adopting a paleo type diet or a primal diet, and then others who need to be much more strict in terms of limiting their carbs to more of a ketogenic threshold, and
Mm.
others still who had major mental illness for decades, and it wasn't keto that got them better, but it was carnivore, and so there's a whole spectrum of experience out there, and it's very hard to know what one person will necessarily need to do, like what lengths will they personally need to go to resolve their health issues. It's about
Right.
experimentation.
And I wonder if we'll start to, as practitioners, the more we communicate about what we're seeing, if we'll
Mhm,
start to see something emerge of who does better on what. Um,
mhm.
that would be interesting. I'm way more interested in that than I would be, who needs to take what probiotic, because I don't think I think that's so minimally helpful.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
but it would be much more, I think, helpful for us to figure out. But I like trial and error. And as long as the person
Mhm,
is willing, to just get started and try. And also, I don't know about, well, I know you write about this in the book, but moderators and abstainers. So
mm.
just figuring out if you're able to
Yeah,
moderate, or if you're like me, I'm an
yes, yeah.
abstainer.
I'm an abstainer as well. Yeah,
Yeah. It's
100%.
yeah, it's so powerful to learn that about yourself. And
Yes.
that way we can understand, because there are people who come in and they want to go jump all in. Like,
Uh,
no, I'm ready to feel good. And there
yeah.
are people who have already tried a ton of things. And so they're really primed. They're ready to take it to the next level. And then there are other people who
Mhm.
are just getting started. Like,
Yeah.
all of this is so new to them, and they just need to take a teeny tiny little step.
Yeah. And I think it's so important to work out which group you fall more into, just because you don't really want to set yourself up to fail from the start. So if you're an
Mhm.
abstainer, then it might be just going all in and making a plan as to when to do it. But if you're a moderator, that might be the thought of that might just be too horrific for you, and you need to take more of a gradual approach and eliminate one thing at a time. And I think sometimes it's very hard for abstainers to understand moderators and vice
And
versa.
vice versa. And
Yes.
to be honest, Dr. Brown, I think most people in the health and wellness field, the practitioners and the physicians, are seem to me to be more moderators. So they don't
Okay. Oh,
understand us
interesting.
they don't understand us and I think it's us, the abstainers, that are like, and we have to heal ourselves, and then we have
Yes.
a better, I'm not going to say better, well, I mean, like, we're abstainers, so it works for us, but I think we have a broader perspective of people needing
Mhm.
both, needing
Okay.
to have, because I don't know that it's easy for a moderator to understand an abstainer. Like, they
Yeah,
just,
I'm sure. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that too much, but I'm sure you're right.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I think I probably have a good concept of what it must be like to be a moderator,
yeah,
but from my own personal point of view, when I learned about carnivore, I it was 2 days and I just jumped straight into it, and I didn't have any major medical issues, and that wasn't the reason why I tried it, but I'd been doing keto basically to reduce my risk of health conditions longer term, and because of some family history of certain kind of neurodegenerative disorders, and I just felt
mhm,
that that was the best lifestyle choice to go to. But when I heard about carnivore, it was just curiosity that got me more than anything else. And sometimes I look back and think, had I known that I was never going to eat X, Y, or Z again, would I have gone so quickly into it? But
yeah.
yeah, I don't regret it at all. It has definitely been the best health decision I've ever made personally.
Mhm.
And it's really hard for other people who are moderators to understand that, because I have people in work who, every so often offer me sweets or chocolates or things that are going around the office. And every so often somebody says, "Are you a machine? Because you never accept any of this." And I just say, "Yeah, I just don't eat that stuff, and actually it doesn't bother me."
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if I
It's
started,
Yeah, oh
we would
yeah.
that was I think that's what people they can understand you don't offer an alcoholic a drink, but
Mhm.
that seem to have a harder time
Oh yeah.
understanding sugar addiction and food addiction.
Yeah,
But
for
I
sure.
think we're getting there. I feel
Mhm.
like, I'm waiting for the addiction practitioner population to wake up to the food
Right.
addiction part, and we'll see.
Yeah, yeah, we can live in hope. Hopefully it'll come sooner rather than later. Yeah, because
Yeah. Yeah.
I often wonder, just in terms of when I discuss ketogenic diets with people, just how much food addiction plays a role in their failure if they don't manage. And I just personally think it's a huge issue out there.
It is, and I think I like that it's getting more attention,
Mhm,
because I think that that's gonna be helpful to so many practitioners,
mhm,
all different kinds of from coaches to psychiatrists and everything in between.
mhm,
Um, so I think and the things that we recommend, I think it'll be people will start broadening their perspective of when they're
mhm.
offering something like, just cut down on that. An
Yeah,
abstainer,
moderate.
like an abstainer, that is the worst advice for an
Oh yeah,
abstainer. Like
everything in moderation.
everything in
Yeah, just
moderation. Do you
no
not
can
just,
do.
oh, stop. Yeah, don't.
Yeah.
And those are moderators that usually give that
Mhm,
advice,
mhm. Yeah, yeah.
thinking it's good advice.
Yes, I know. Not realizing it doesn't work for everyone. Yeah,
Right. And it
yeah.
will work for some, but it's not gonna work for a
Mhm.
whole host of other people. So tell me, you were compelled to write the book because
Um, so I after having done George's training and
Mhm,
then just continuing to work within the field I work in, I eventually just felt compelled to do some further reviewing of the research literature myself.
mhm,
And I decided, oh, I'm going to make some notes for myself and really put everything in order in terms of my mind. And I am at a bit of a crossroads in my career because of all this other knowledge that I have, and just feeling frustrated at how much better things could be done, and feeling a bit more aligned in terms of functional medicine as opposed to allopathic medicine. So I have various things pulling me in various directions. But I really just set out to make notes for myself. And then as I was going, I thought maybe I should just make an attempt at writing a book. And so I just started to write notes in a language that I thought other people might find accessible.
yes.
And that was it. It's a bit like the abstainer thing. So once I decided I was doing it, I just did it and buckled down and did it quite quickly. So that's how that came about. But it was also out of a sense of frustration in
Mhm,
terms of not always having the opportunity to tell patients everything that I really want to tell them in
yes,
relation to diet and gut health, and how all the different systems in the body, such as immune system and your metabolic system and mitochondria and inflammation and insulin resistance and just all of that, how that all fits together and pieces together. I just hope to write something that might be a good reference resource for people who are more interested in looking into that in terms of their mental health.
right, which you did. It's great because it's very accessible. You don't have to go to medical school to be able to read which I
Mhm,
love. Because you can give it, I can recommend it to anyone and they can understand it. There's so many ahas, I think, for people, the way that it's laid out, starting with gut health and then
mhm.
moving through and understanding oxidative stress and
Stress,
the oxidation and just
yeah.
understanding reactive oxygen species. Like we're
Mhm,
supposed to have some of that. That's natural in the
mhm.
body.
Yeah.
Not this much. Like
No.
that is inflammation. It's just lost
Yeah.
electrons. So helping people kind of understand how we
Yeah.
gather electrons,
Yes.
not just from our food, but earthing and
Mhm,
sunlight and what's important for our
mhm.
mitochondria. So I think putting it all there together, and then you lay out
Mhm.
paleo, keto, low carb,
Mhm.
carnivore, so that people
Yeah.
can understand what the difference is and then maybe pick what
Yeah.
feels right to them. Because I think at the end of the day, we all have to see what resonates with us.
Yes.
And
Yeah, I absolutely
yeah,
agree. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
because it I don't think it should be, our job as a practitioner to dictate to somebody else what they should be doing. It should be working alongside people and offering them choices and
mhm,
letting them make an informed choice about what would be the most realistic thing to try for them, and knowing that there are other options if they start off on a journey and decide to go deeper and try something a bit further towards ketogenic or even carnivore. So yeah, I'm a big believer in trying to empower people with knowledge and let them make a good decision that applies to themselves, because at the end of the day we don't really know anyone else's personal set of circumstances, or
mhm.
we might know that they're coming from a background of trauma, or there have been
Yes,
other aspects in their early life that might well influence their stress response and their HPA axis, but we can't make that decision for them. We need to just give them the information that's out there and support them and guide them if we need to, but support them primarily in making their own decision,
absolutely.
empowering. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's what's right about our profession. I
Yeah.
think that's what's great about the way that we're trained too, is to help people be more of a guide for people, help them find. I used to tell my students, you may see the front door, and I don't know why I used barn, but I used to say you can see the front door to the barn, but you got to walk people all the way around the barn. Walk with them until they see.
Mhm.
You can see that it's this particular trauma in their life that it keeps tripping them up, but they need to find their way there, because
Mhm.
you can't rush people
Mhm.
through that process. So I'm a big believer too in clearing up trauma, and
Mhm.
that does not have to be years and years and years. We have wonderful trauma tools that we can help people with. You in particular, I think what would be awesome is that so many people are trying to figure out their medication. And so
Yeah.
even though you may not be able to prescribe across, they may not be your patient, you can
Mhm.
consult with people to help so they know what to say to their doctors, and they
Yes.
know what to look for if they're starting to have improvements in their health and their
Mhm.
mental health, how to titrate off of some of these medications.
Yes. Yeah.
So that would, I mean, I just think there's going to be a huge need for that,
Mhm.
because so
Oh
many,
yeah, that
yeah.
would be my dream, would be to
Mhm.
to be practicing and deprescribing for people, or giving them the advice that they need to be able to have the correct conversation with their healthcare provider, and then work with them towards their goal of minimizing medication, or even in some cases managing to come off entirely.
Yeah, which
So,
is so, I think people would
mhm.
feel so much more relieved and free. And I like that in the book you also talk about the problems with medication, that these
Yeah.
psychotropic medications in particular, but even like statins are an
Um,
anti-brain drug.
oh,
Oh,
they might be my most hated drug of all
I know.
time.
Mhm,
But just when you think about it,
mhm.
cholesterol's in every cell of the body, makes up a huge proportion of the brain, and is absolutely essential for
Life.
health and brain health and life. And
Mhm. Yeah.
um, yeah, I get really frustrated about the whole cholesterol hypothesis,
Me
and
too. I know
yeah,
we're getting close to time, but can we just have to unpack that for a second, that cholesterol has been wrongfully vilified. And why
absolutely.
would the brain make, I mean, it has to make cholesterol because it doesn't
Mhm.
cross the blood-brain barrier. It's a big
Mhm.
molecule.
Yeah.
So why would the brain, a really important organ in the body, make
Mhm.
all this cholesterol that it needs because it's so important if it was
Mhm.
somehow going to hurt us? Like that
Yeah.
doesn't
It
even make
doesn't make any sense.
sense.
There's nothing logical about about that.
Nothing left. And I do think that, just because cholesterol is at the scene of the crime doesn't mean that it committed the crime. So I think people
Yeah.
associate heart disease and cholesterol because cholesterol is protective and healing in the body. It will be sent when there is
Mhm.
damage, I don't know, to an artery wall.
Mhm.
And so then it gets
Yeah.
implicated in the disease, but
Yeah.
it actually didn't cause the disease.
No, and again, it comes back to oxidation, and it's the oxidized LDL that's the problem, not the rest of your LDL. And I don't know if you saw, but Dr. Paul Mason released a podcast just in the last week. I think it was called "Is Your Cardiologist a Clot?"
Clot.
And
I
and
saw that.
he raised some really interesting theories and points in that in relation to plant sterols being very chemically similar to cholesterol. And he was putting the question out there as to whether it's actually plant sterols that are found at the scene of the plaques in coronary artery disease as opposed to cholesterol. And he makes some really valid points in that. So yeah,
Mhm.
that was one of those my mind has been blown
I,
lectures when I watched that.
I know.
Um,
Well,
yeah,
yeah.
it was yet another yeah, just a yet another very interesting take on plants in the diet. And in that he was just questioning whether coconut oil being a source of plant sterols might not actually be ideal for human health. So
Which
yeah.
is wow, because
Yeah.
there we are. And I think it's important, there are some studies that show that lower cholesterol in
Oh yeah.
people actually increases mental health issues, like mostly in
Mhm.
anxiety and depression.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
can we at least start having an honest conversation about cholesterol and
Absolutely. Well, aren't statins one of the biggest grossing drugs for big pharma? That
right, but I think
yeah.
most well-meaning doctors, physicians, psychiatrists, psychologists, like people
Mhm.
want to know, they want to help people. They don't want to be
Mhm.
misinformed, I feel like.
Yeah,
But
that's
I
true.
do feel like there's a lot of people like you and I seem to have a similarity in terms of curiosity. Like
Mhm.
curiosity is my signature strength.
Yes.
I like to dig. That's why
Yeah.
I'm a qualitative researcher. I just dig and dig and dig. And I think that maybe that's something that's in relation to being an abstainer too. I'm not sure. But
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
I do think that a lot of people, they're seeing patients or they're in work situations where they just go from play and then they don't study outside of that
Mhm.
because it doesn't
Yeah.
they don't either they
Yeah.
don't see a need to or it's they don't have the burning curiosity like we do where we're y-
Yeah, and I think some people are just under so much pressure, certainly in the NHS and in primary care over here,
yes.
that they just don't have the time, or doctors are burnt out, and stress affects everybody. And sometimes for some people it's just about trying to get through their day, and not necessarily having the emotional space to devote to trying to dig deeper and find out about other things. So I
Yeah.
really like the work that Ken Berry does in terms of all
Yeah.
the advice he gives us in his videos, and particularly the ones where he quotes the relevant study and then says, now you go to your doctor and you show them this and ask them to explain. And so I think it's so important for people to take charge of their own health, and to have a curiosity about their own health, and to do their own research.
Yeah, and to find a doctor that is open to you bringing research papers in
Well,
and
yeah.
saying, "Hey," yeah, because that's I found they get a little defensive when you say, "Well, I'm
Mhm.
actually on the fiber's not important. I'm in
Yeah.
the fiber's not important camp," and they're like, "What? That's a camp?" I'm like, "Yeah, there's a whole camp of us that are questioning fiber and
Yes.
how helpful it is in real life."
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
yeah, that's a whole nother thing. But I mean,
It is.
I love that you're putting more and more out there. I'm so grateful that there are those of us who are specifically looking at mental health. I mean, there's no doubt that mental health and metabolic health, like you
Mhm.
can't separate those two things.
No.
Um,
And
so
and that just I'm so grateful for all the research that is there, and
Mhm.
for people like Dr. Palmer, who's also published in the last year, for all the work that he's been doing to connect the dots, because it completely changes the perspective of the approach to mental health disorders. And I think that this should really take away any stigma that exists in relation to mental health, because
Mhm.
if we can say that you can reduce everything down to a cellular level, and
Yes.
demonstrate that there are metabolic abnormalities and mitochondrial function issues and
Mhm.
brain energy issues, then really that should remove a lot of the stigma that comes inherently with different mental disorders, and
Yeah.
then diagnosis is a completely other ballpark. So yeah, that's
Yes.
another topic. But
Yeah.
yeah, I just think of all mental disorders as having some sort of root foundation in dysfunctional metabolic health and immune system activation, and try to think holistically about all the different bodily systems that are involved.
Yeah. I 100% agree. And just also, I mean, it doesn't take a huge leap to understand. I think Gabor Mate talks about this too, that emotions are very similar. It's an internal guide. It's an internal system that tells you where you're going because emotions are like the immune system. So they're
Okay.
to let in what is nourishing and helpful and to keep out what is draining and toxic.
Okay.
Same from our
Yeah.
immune system. So there's not a
Yeah.
huge leap. Like these systems are not separate. There's no separation in mind
Yeah.
body. Right.
Exactly. And then I just think of antidepressants and how a lot of them
Yeah.
cause you gastrointestinal upset in the beginning. And then you think, well, if gut health is irrelevant to brain health, then why would a medication that's supposedly targeting neurotransmitters cause you stomach upset as a major side effect? And yeah, just once you start to open your mind to that, everything kind of slots together nicely, would be my
Hmm.
argument.
Yeah. And I think once you just open up, it all does start to make a lot of sense. But you
Mhm.
have to be willing to question absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And I
Oh,
think that's,
if I've learned one thing in my life, it is question everything.
yeah,
And do not just
yeah,
automatically trust the experts. Don't blindly trust expert opinion. You need to
yeah,
look at the research yourself or get somebody you trust to help you to do that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And even an N of one. So
Yes.
I get to experiment with my
Hmm.
own body, my own mind. So I think that you can't underestimate that gut reaction, that your own
Hmm.
intuition, I guess,
Yes.
around that. So you're helping all these people. You're changing the way we all think about mental health and busy person. So what
Yes.
nourishes your body, mind, soul?
Oh gosh, quite a few different things.
Yeah.
So I start with carnivore and my nutrition because that gives me a really good foundation. Um, and that has really helped in terms of that zero carb zen that people talk about. So having a sense of optimism and being able to manage stress a bit more easily. But just physical activity and connection with loved ones and family and friendships. And I need to work more on the connecting with the earth and grounding and earthing and so on, but that's going to come.
It will.
But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I just feel really passionately about wanting to get the message out there and giving people other options to explore in terms of optimizing their mental health. And I think there are so many of us now, and so many people speaking out about their own transformations and experiences of changing diet and the impact that can have, as well as other lifestyle measures that, yeah, I just feel passionately about getting that message out to as many people as possible.
Yeah, I agree with you, and that's why I'm so grateful that you came on and we got to have a conversation because I wanted to meet you anyway, and we've communicated a little bit on Instagram.
Mhm.
It's just nice to have another meat eater that's
Yeah.
in the mental health. Like, hey, how are
Yes.
you? We're friends. Across the pond, but we're friends.
Yeah.
So it's just nice to be able to talk to you. And I just think it's great any way that we can get the message out. So I really appreciate the book and I appreciate you being here.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I really appreciated this conversation and just getting to connect with you. And yeah,
Yeah.
hopefully that will be an ongoing thing. And it's always so nice to meet somebody in person, albeit virtually, but to have that connection going forward with
Yeah.
all the online communications.
Yeah. And I can tell that we can have more and more of these kinds of we could probably talk all day for
Oh, I
people.
know. Yeah, it
So
could go on for hours, I think.
yeah.